The Last Illusion. What happened then, when the magician, having mesmerized the caged tiger, pulled the tasseled cord that released a dozen swords upon its head, was the subject of heated argument both in the bar of the theatre and later, when Swan's performance was over, on the sidewalk of 51st Street. Some claimed to have glimpsed the bottom of the cage opening in the split second that all other eyes were on the descending blades, and seen the tiger swiftly spirited away as the woman in the red dress took its place behind the lacquered bars. Others were just as adamant that the animal had never been in the cage to begin with, its presence merely a projection which had been extinguished as a mechanism propelled the woman from beneath the stage. This, of course, at such a speed that it deceived the eye of all but those swift and suspicious enough to catch it. And the swords? The nature of the trick which had transformed them in the mere seconds of their gleaming descent from steel to rose petals was yet further fuel for debate. The explanations ranged from the prosaic to the elaborate, but few of the throng that left the theatre lacked some theory. Nor did the arguments finish there, on the sidewalk. They raged on, no doubt, in the apartments and restaurants of New York. The pleasure to be had from Swan's illusions was, it seemed, twofold. First, the spectacle of the trick itself, in the breathless moment when disbelief was, if not suspended, at least taken on tiptoe. And second, when the moment was over and logic restored, in the debate as to how the trick had been achieved. "How do you do it, Mr. Swan?" Barbara Bernstein was eager to know. "It's magic," Swan replied. He had invited her backstage to examine the tiger's cage for any sign of fakery in its construction. She had found none. She had examined the swords. They were lethal, and the petals fragrant. Still, she insisted. "Yes, but really—" She leaned close to him. "You can tell me," she said. "I promise. I won't breathe a word to a soul." He returned her a slow smile in place of a reply. "Oh, I know," she said. "You're going to tell me that you've signed some kind of oath." "That's right," Swan said. "And you're forbidden to give away any trade secrets." "The intention is to give you pleasure," he told her. "Have I failed in that?" "Oh, no," she replied, without a moment's hesitation. "Everybody's talking about the show. You're the toast of New York." "No," he protested. "Truly," she said. "I know people who would give their eye-teeth to get into this theatre, and to have a guided tour backstage. Well, I'll be the envy of everybody." "I'm pleased," he said, and touched her face. She had clearly been anticipating such a move on his part. It would be something else for her to boast of. Her seduction by the man critics had dubbed the Magus of Manhattan. "I'd like to make love to you," he whispered to her. "Here?" she said. "No," he told her, "not within earshot of the tigers." She laughed. She preferred her lover's 20 years Swan's junior. He looked, someone had observed, like a man in mourning for his profile, but his touch promised wit no boy could offer. She liked the tang of dissolution she sensed beneath his gentlemanly facade. Swan was a dangerous man. If she turned him down, she might never find another. "We could go to a hotel," she suggested. "A hotel," he said, "is a good idea." A look of doubt had crossed her face. "What about your wife?" she said. "We might be seen." He took her hand. "Shall we be invisible, then?" "I'm serious." "So am I," he insisted. "Take it from me. Seeing is not believing. I should know. It's the cornerstone of my profession." She did not look much reassured. "If anyone recognizes us," he told her, "I'll simply tell them their eyes are playing tricks." She smiled at this, and he kissed her. She returned the kiss with unquestionable fervor. "Miraculous," he said when their mouths parted. "Shall we go, before the tigers gossip?" He led her across the stage. The cleaners had not yet got about their business, and there, lying on the boards, was a litter of rosebuds. Some had been trampled, a few had not. Swan took his hand from hers and walked across to where the flowers lay. She watched him stoop to pluck a rose from the ground, enchanted by the gesture, but before he could stand upright again, something in the air above him caught her eye. She looked up, and her gaze met a slice of silver that was even now plunging toward him. She made to warn him, but the sword was quicker than her tongue. At the last possible moment he seemed to sense the danger he was in and looked round, the bud in his hand, as the point met his back. The sword's momentum carried it through his body to the hilt. Blood fled from his chest and splashed the floor. He made no sound, but fell forward, forcing 2/3 of the sword's length out of his body again as he hit the stage. She would have screamed, but her attention was claimed by a sound from the clutter of magical apparatus arrayed in the wings behind her, a muttered growl which was indisputably the voice of the tiger. She froze. There were probably instructions on how best to stare down rogue tigers, but they were techniques she, as a Manhattanite born and bred, wasn't acquainted with. "Swan," she said, hoping this yet might be some Baroque illusion staged purely for her benefit. "Swan! Please, get up!" But the magician only lay where he had fallen, the pool spreading from beneath him. "If this is a joke," she said testily, "I'm not amused." When he didn't rise to her remark, she tried a sweeter tactic. "Swan, my sweet, I'd like to go now, if you don't mind." The growl came again. She didn't want to turn and seek out its source, but equally she didn't want to be sprung upon from behind. Cautiously, she looked round. The wings were in darkness. The clutter of properties kept her from working out the precise location of the beast. She could hear it still, however, its tread, its growl. Step by step she retreated toward the apron of the stage. The closed curtains sealed her off from the auditorium, but she hoped she might scramble under them before the tiger reached her. As she backed against the heavy fabric, one of the shadows in the wings forsook its ambiguity, and the animal appeared. It was not beautiful, as she had thought it when behind bars. It was vast and lethal and hungry. She went down on her haunches and reached for the hem of the curtain. The fabric was heavily weighted, and she had more difficulty lifting it than she'd expected, but she had managed to slide halfway under the drape when, head and hands pressed to the boards, she sensed the thump of the tiger's advance. An instant later she felt the splash of its breath on her bare back, and screamed as it hooked its talons into her body and hauled her from the sight of safety toward its steaming jaws. Even then she refused to give up her life. She kicked at it and tore at its fur in handfuls and delivered a hail of punches to its snout. But her resistance was negligible in the face of such authority. Her assault, for all its ferocity, did not slow the beast a jot. It ripped open her body with one casual clout. Mercifully, with that first wound, her senses gave up all claim to verisimilitude and took instead to preposterous invention. It seemed to her that she heard applause from somewhere, and the roar of an approving audience, and that, in place of the blood that was surely springing from her body, there came fountains of sparkling light. The agony her nerve endings were suffering didn't touch her at all. Even when the animal had divided her into 3 or 4 parts, her head lay on its side at the edge of the stage, and watched as her torso was mauled and her limbs devoured. And all the while, when she wondered how all this could be possible, that her eyes could live to witness this last supper, the only reply she could think of was Swan's. "It's magic," he'd said. Indeed, she was thinking that very thing, that this must be magic, when the tiger ambled across to her head and swallowed it down in one bite. Among a certain set, Harry Damour liked to believe he had some small reputation, a coterie which did not, alas, include his ex-wife, his creditors, or those anonymous critics who regularly posted dog's excrement through his office mailbox. But the woman who was on the phone now, her voice so full of grief she might have been crying for half a year, and was about to begin again, she knew him for the paragon he was. "I need your help, Mr. Damour, very badly." "I'm busy on several cases at the moment," he told her. "Maybe you could come to the office." I can't leave the house, the woman informed him. I'll explain everything. Please, come. He was sorely tempted, but there were several outstanding cases, one of which, if not solved soon, might end in fratricide. He suggested she try elsewhere. I can't go to just anybody, the woman insisted. Why me? I read about you, about what happened in Brooklyn. Making mention of his most conspicuous failure was not the surest method of securing his services, Harry thought, but it certainly got his attention. What had happened in Wyckoff Street had begun innocently enough, with a husband who'd employed him to spy on his adulterous wife, and had ended on the top story of the Lomax house, with the world he thought he'd known turning inside out. When the body count was done and the surviving priests dispatched, he was left with fear of stares and more questions than he'd ever answer this side of the family plot. He took no pleasure in being reminded of those terrors. I don't like to talk about Brooklyn, he said. Forgive me, the woman replied, but I need somebody who has experience with the occult. She stopped speaking for a moment. He could still hear her breath down the line, soft but erratic. I need you, she said. He had already decided in that pause, when only her fear had been audible, what reply he would make. I'll come. I'm grateful to you, she said. The house is on East 61st Street. He scribbled down the details. Her last words were, Please, hurry. Then she put down the phone. He made some calls in the vain hope of placating two of his more excitable clients, then pulled on his jacket, locked the office, and started downstairs. The landing and the lobby smelled pungent. As he reached the front door, he caught Chaplin, the janitor, emerging from the basement. This place stinks, he told the man. It's disinfectant. It's cat's piss, Harry said. Get something done about it, will you? I've got a reputation to protect. He left the man, laughing. The brownstone on East 61st Street was in pristine condition. He stood on the scrubbed step, sweaty and sour-breathed, and felt like a slob. The expression on the face that met him when the door opened did nothing to dissuade him of that opinion. Yes, it wanted to know. I'm Harry D'Amour, he said. I got a call. The man nodded. You'd better come in, he said, without enthusiasm. It was cooler in than out, and sweeter. The place reeked of perfume. Harry followed the disapproving face down the hallway and into a large room, on the other side of which, across an oriental carpet that had everything woven into its pattern but the price, sat a widow. She didn't suit black or tears. She stood up and offered her hand. Mr. D'Amour? Yes. Valentin will get you something to drink if you'd like. Please. Milk, if you have it. His belly had been jittering for the last hour, since her talk of Wyckoff Street, in fact. Valentin retired from the room, not taking his beady eyes off Harry until the last possible moment. Somebody died, said Harry, once the man had gone. That's right, the widow said, sitting down again. At her invitation he sat opposite her, among enough cushions to furnish a harem. My husband. I'm sorry. There's no time to be sorry, she said, her every look and gesture betraying her words. He was glad of her grief, the tear-stains and the fatigue blemished, a beauty which, had he seen it unimpaired, might have rendered him dumb with admiration. They say that my husband's death was an accident, she was saying. I know it wasn't. May I ask your name? I'm sorry. My name is Swan, Mr. D'Amour. Dorothea Swan. You may have heard of my husband. The magician. Illusionist, she said. I read about it. Tragic. Did you ever see his performance? Harry shook his head. I can't afford Broadway, Mrs. Swan. We were only over for 3 months while his show ran. We were going back in September. Back? To Hamburg, she said. I don't like this city. It's too hot and too cruel. Don't blame New York, he said. It can't help itself. Maybe, she replied, nodding. Perhaps what happened to Swan would have happened anyway, wherever we'd been. People keep telling me it was an accident, that's all. Just an accident. But you don't believe it. Valentin had appeared with a glass of milk. He set it down on the table in front of Harry. As he made to leave, she said, "Valentin, the letter." He looked at her strangely, almost as though she'd said something obscene. "The letter," she repeated. He exited. "You were saying?" She frowned. "What?" "About it being an accident." "Oh, yes. I lived with Swan 7.5 years, and I got to understand him as well as anybody ever could. I learned to sense when he wanted me around and when he didn't. When he didn't, I'd take myself off somewhere and let him have his privacy. Genius needs privacy. And he was a genius, you know. The greatest illusionist since Houdini." "Is that so?" "I'd think sometimes it was a kind of miracle that he let me into his life." Harry wanted to say Swan would have been mad not to have done so, but the comment was inappropriate. She didn't want blandishments, didn't need them, didn't need anything, perhaps, but her husband alive again. "Now I think I didn't know him at all," she went on, "didn't understand him. I think maybe it was another trick, another part of his magic." "I called him a magician a while back," Harry said. "You corrected me." "So I did," she said, conceding his point with an apologetic look. "Forgive me. That was Swan talking. He hated to be called a magician. He said that was a word that had to be kept for miracle workers." "And he was no miracle worker." "He used to call himself the Great Pretender," she said. The thought made her smile. Valentin had reappeared, his lugubrious features rife with suspicion. He carried an envelope which he clearly had no desire to give up. Dorothea had to cross the carpet and take it from his hands. "Is this wise?" he said. "Yes," she told him. He turned on his heel and made a smart withdrawal. "He's grief-stricken," she said. "Forgive him his behavior. He was with Swan from the beginning of his career. I think he loved my husband as much as I did." She ran her finger down into the envelope and pulled the letter out. The paper was pale yellow and gossamer thin. "A few hours after he died, this letter was delivered here by hand," she said. "It was addressed to him. I opened it. I think you ought to read it." She passed it to him. The hand it was written in was solid and unaffected. "Dorothea," he had written, "if you are reading this, then I am dead. You know how little store I set by dreams and premonitions and such, but for the last few days strange thoughts have just crept into my head, and I have the suspicion that death is very close to me. If so, so. There's no help for it. Don't waste time trying to puzzle out the whys and wherefores. They're old news now. Just know that I love you and that I have always loved you in my way. I'm sorry for whatever unhappiness I've caused or am causing now, but it was out of my hands. I have some instructions regarding the disposal of my body. Please adhere to them to the letter. Don't let anybody try to persuade you out of doing as I ask. I want you to have my body watched night and day until I'm cremated. Don't try and take my remains back to Europe. Have me cremated here as soon as possible, then throw the ashes in the East River. My sweet darling, I'm afraid. Not of bad dreams or of what might happen to me in this life, but of what my enemies may try to do once I'm dead. You know how critics can be. They wait until you can't fight them back, then they start the character assassinations. It's too long a business to try and explain all of this, so I must simply trust you to do as I say. Again, I love you, and I hope you never have to read this letter. Your adoring Swan. "Some farewell note," Harry commented when he'd read it through twice. He folded it up and passed it back to the widow. "I'd like you to stay with him," she said. "Corpse sit, if you will, just until all the legal formalities are dealt with and I can make arrangements for his cremation. It shouldn't take them long. I've got a lawyer working on it now. Again, why me? She avoided his gaze. As he says in the letter, he was never superstitious. But I am. I believe in omens. And there was an odd atmosphere about the place in the days before he died, as if we were watched. You think he was murdered? She mused on this, then said, I don't believe it was an accident. These enemies he talks about. He was a great man, much envied. Professional jealousy? Is that a motive for murder? Anything can be a motive, can't it? She said. People get killed for the color of their eyes, don't they? Harry was impressed. It had taken him 20 years to learn how arbitrary things were. She spoke it as conventional wisdom. Where is your husband? He asked her. Upstairs, she said. I had the body brought back here where I could look after him. I can't pretend I understand what's going on, but I'm not going to risk ignoring his instructions. Harry nodded. Swan was my life, she added softly, apropos of nothing and everything. She took him upstairs. The perfume that had met him at the door intensified. The master bedroom had been turned into a chapel of rest, knee-deep in sprays and wreaths of every shape and variety. Their mingled scents verged on the hallucinogenic. In the midst of this abundance, the casket, an elaborate affair in black and silver, was mounted on trestles. The upper half of the lid stood open, the plush overlay folded back. At Dorothea's invitation he waded through the tributes to view the deceased. He liked Swan's face. It had humour and a certain guile. It was even handsome in its weary way. More, it had inspired the love of Dorothea. A face could have few better recommendations. Harry stood waist-high in flowers, and, absurd as it was, felt a twinge of envy for the love this man must have enjoyed. "Will you help me, Mr. Damour?" What could he say but, "Yes, of course I'll help." That, and, "Call me Harry." He would be missed at Wing's Pavilion tonight. He had occupied the best table there every Friday night for the past 6.5 years, eating at one sitting enough to compensate for what his diet lacked in excellence and variety the other 6 days of the week. This feast, the best Chinese cuisine to be had south of Canal Street, came gratis, thanks to services he had once rendered the owner. Tonight the table would go empty. Not that his stomach suffered. He had only been sitting with Swan an hour or so when Valentin came up and said, "How do you like your steak?" "Just shy of burned," Harry replied. Valentin was none too pleased by the response. "I hate to overcook good steak," he said. "And I hate the sight of blood," Harry said, "even if it isn't my own." The chef clearly despaired of his guest's palate and turned to go. "Valentin." The man looked round. "Is that your Christian name?" Harry asked. "Christian names are for Christians," came the reply. Harry nodded. "You don't like my being here, am I right?" Valentin made no reply. His eyes had drifted past Harry to the open coffin. "I'm not going to be here for long," Harry said, "but while I am, can't we be friends?" Valentin's gaze found him once more. "I don't have any friends," he said without enmity or self-pity. "Not now." "Okay. I'm sorry." "What's to be sorry for?" Valentin wanted to know. "Swan's dead. It's all over, bar the shouting." The doleful face stoically refused tears. A stone would weep sooner, Harry guessed, but there was grief there, and all the more acute for being dumb. "One question." "Only one?" "Why didn't you want me to read his letter?" Valentin raised his eyebrows slightly. They were fine enough to have been penciled on. "He wasn't insane," he said. "I didn't want you thinking he was a crazy man because of what he wrote. What you read, you keep to yourself. Swan was a legend. I don't want his memory besmirched. You should write a book, Harry said. Tell the whole story once and for all. You were with him a long time, I hear. Oh, yes, said Valentine. Long enough to know better than to tell the truth. So saying, he made an exit, leaving the flowers to wilt, and Harry with more puzzles on his hands than he'd begun with. 20 minutes later, Valentine brought up a tray of food, a large salad, bread, wine, and the steak. It was 1 degree short of charcoal. Just the way I like it, Harry said, and set to guzzling. He didn't see Dorothea Swan, though God knows he thought about her often enough. Every time he heard a whisper on the stairs or footsteps along the carpeted landing, he hoped her face would appear at the door, an invitation on her lips. Not perhaps the most appropriate of thoughts, given the proximity of her husband's corpse, but what would the illusionist care now? He was dead and gone. If he had any generosity of spirit, he wouldn't want to see his widow drown in her grief. Harry drank the half-carafe of wine Valentine had brought, and when, 3/4 of an hour later, the man reappeared with coffee and calvados, he told him to leave the bottle. Nightfall was near. The traffic was noisy on Lexington and 3rd. Out of boredom he took to watching the street from the window. 2 lovers feuded loudly on the sidewalk and only stopped when a brunette with a hare lip and a Pekingese stood watching them shamelessly. There were preparations for a party in the brownstone opposite. He watched a table lovingly laid and candles lit. After a time the spying began to depress him, so he called Valentine and asked if there was a portable television he could have access to. No sooner said than provided, and for the next 2 hours he sat with the small black-and-white monitor on the floor among the orchids and the lilies, watching whatever mindless entertainment it offered, the silver luminescence flickering on the blooms like excitable moonlight. 1/4 after midnight, with the party across the street in full swing, Valentine came up. "You want a nightcap?" he asked. "Sure." "Milk, or something stronger?" "Something stronger." He produced a bottle of fine cognac and 2 glasses. Together they toasted the dead man. "Mr. Swan." "Mr. Swan." "If you need anything more tonight," Valentine said, "I'm in the room directly above. Mrs. Swan is downstairs, so if you hear somebody moving about, don't worry. She doesn't sleep well these nights." "Who does?" Harry replied. Valentine left him to his vigil. Harry heard the man's tread on the stairs and then the creaking of floorboards on the level above. He returned his attention to the television, but he'd lost the thread of the movie he'd been watching. It was a long stretch till dawn. Meanwhile, New York would be having itself a fine Friday night, dancing, fighting, fooling around. The picture on the television set began to flicker. He stood up and started to walk across to the set, but he never got there. 2 steps from the chair where he'd been sitting, the picture folded up and went out altogether, plunging the room into total darkness. Harry briefly had time to register that no light was finding its way through the windows from the street. Then the insanity began. Something moved in the blackness. Vague forms rose and fell. It took him a moment to recognize them. The flowers. Invisible hands were tearing the wreaths and tributes apart and tossing the blossoms up into the air. He followed their descent, but they didn't hit the ground. It seemed the floorboards had lost all faith in themselves and disappeared, so the blossoms just kept falling, down, down, through the floor of the room below and through the basement floor away to God alone knew what destination. Fear gripped Harry like some old dope-pusher promising a terrible high. Even those few boards that remained beneath his feet were becoming insubstantial. In seconds, he would go the way of the blossoms. He reeled around to locate the chair he'd got up from, some fixed point in this vertiginous nightmare. The chair was still there. He could just discern its form in the gloom. With torn blossoms raining down upon him, he reached for it, but even as his hand took hold of the arm, the floor beneath the chair gave up the ghost, and now, by a ghastly light that was thrown up from the pit that yawned beneath his feet, Harry saw it tumble away into hell, turning over and over till it was pinprick small. Then it was gone, And the flowers were gone, and the walls and the windows, and every damn thing was gone but him. Not quite everything. Swan's casket remained, its lid still standing open, its overlay neatly turned back like the sheet on a child's bed. The trestle had gone, as had the floor beneath the trestle, but the casket floated in the dark air for all the world like some morbid illusion, while from the depths a rumbling sound accompanied the trick like the roll of a snare drum. Harry felt the last solidity failing beneath him, felt the pit call. Even as his feet left the ground, that ground faded to nothing, and for a terrifying moment he hung over the gulfs, his hands seeking the lip of the casket. His right hand caught hold of one of the handles and closed thankfully around it. His arm was almost jerked from its socket as it took his body weight, but he flung his other arm up and found the casket edge. Using it as purchase, he hauled himself up like a half-drowned sailor. It was a strange lifeboat, but then this was a strange sea, infinitely deep, infinitely terrible. Even as he laboured to secure himself a better handhold, the casket shook, and Harry looked up to discover that the dead man was sitting upright. Swan's eyes opened wide. He turned them on Harry. They were far from benign. The next moment the dead illusionist was scrambling to his feet, the floating casket rocking ever more violently with each movement. Once vertical, Swan proceeded to dislodge his guest by grinding his heel in Harry's knuckles. Harry looked up at Swan, begging for him to stop. The great pretender was a sight to see. His eyes were starting from his sockets, his shirt was torn open to display the exit wound in his chest. It was bleeding afresh. A rain of cold blood fell upon Harry's upturned face, and still the heel ground at his hands. Harry felt his grip slipping. Swan, sensing his approaching triumph, began to smile. "Fall, boy," he said. "Fall." Harry could take no more. In a frenzied effort to save himself, he let go of the handle in his right hand and reached up to snatch at Swan's trouser leg. His fingers found the hem, and he pulled. The smile vanished from the illusionist's face as he felt his balance go. He reached behind him to take hold of the casket lid for support, but the gesture only tipped the casket farther over. The plush cushion tumbled past Harry's head. Blossoms followed. Swan howled in his fury and delivered a vicious kick to Harry's hand. It was an error. The casket tipped over entirely and pitched the man out. Harry had time to glimpse Swan's appalled face as the illusionist fell past him. Then he too lost his grip and tumbled after him. The dark air whined past his ears. Beneath him the gulfs spread their empty arms. And then, behind the rushing in his head, another sound. A human voice. "Is he dead?" it inquired. "No," another voice replied. "No, I don't think so. What's his name, Dorothea?" "Damour." "Mr. Damour? Mr. Damour?" Harry's descent slowed somewhat. Beneath him the gulfs roared their rage. The voice came again, cultivated but unmelodious. "Mr. Damour." "Harry," said Dorothea. At that word, from that voice, he stopped falling, felt himself borne up. He opened his eyes. He was lying on a solid floor, his head inches from the blank television screen. The flowers were all in place around the room, Swan in his casket, and God, if the rumours were to be believed, in his heaven. "I'm alive," he said. He had quite an audience for his resurrection. Dorothea, of course, and two strangers. One, the owner of the voice he'd first heard, stood close to the door. His features were unremarkable except for his brows and lashes, which were pale to the point of invisibility. His female companion stood nearby. She shared with him this distressing banality, stripped bare of any feature that offered a clue to their natures. "Help him up, Angel," the man said, and the woman went to comply. She was stronger than she looked, readily hauling Harry to his feet. He had vomited in his strange sleep. He felt dirty and ridiculous. "What the hell happened?" he asked, as the woman escorted him to the chair. He sat down. "He tried to poison you," the man said. "Who did?" Valentin, of course. Valentin? He's gone, Dorothea said. Just disappeared. She was shaking. I heard you call out, and came in here to find you on the floor. I thought you were going to choke. It's all right, said the man. Everything is in order now. Yes, said Dorothea, clearly reassured by his bland smile. This is the lawyer I was telling you about, Harry. Mr. Butterfield. Harry wiped his mouth. Pleased to meet you, he said. Why don't we all go downstairs, Butterfield said, and I can pay Mr. Damour what he's due. It's all right, Harry said. I never take my fee until the job's done. But it is done, Butterfield said. Your services are no longer required here. Harry threw a glance at Dorothea. She was plucking a withered anthurium from an otherwise healthy spray. I was contracted to stay with the body. The arrangements for the disposal of Swan's body have been made, Butterfield returned. His courtesy was only just intact. Isn't that right, Dorothea? It's the middle of the night, Harry protested. You won't get a cremation until tomorrow morning at the earliest. Thank you for your help, Dorothea said, but I'm sure everything will be fine now that Mr. Butterfield has arrived. Just fine. Butterfield turned to his companion. Why don't you go out and find a cab for Mr. Damour, he said. Then, looking at Harry, we don't want you walking the streets, do we? All the way downstairs, and in the hallway as Butterfield paid him off, Harry was willing Dorothea to contradict the lawyer and tell him she wanted Harry to stay. But she didn't even offer him a word of farewell as he was ushered out of the house. The $200 he'd been given were, of course, more than adequate recompense for the few hours of idleness he'd spent there, but he would happily have burned all the bills for one sign that Dorothea gave a damn that they were parting. Quite clearly, she did not. On past experience, it would take his bruised ego a full 24 hours to recover from such indifference. He got out of the cab on 3rd around 83rd Street and walked through to a bar on Lexington where he knew he could put half a bottle of bourbon between himself and the dreams he'd had. It was well after 1. The street was deserted, except for him and for the echo his footsteps had recently acquired. He turned the corner onto Lexington and waited. A few beats later, Valentin rounded the same corner. Harry took hold of him by his tie. "Not a bad noose," he said, hauling the man off his heels. Valentin made no attempt to free himself. "Thank God you're alive," he said. "No thanks to you," Harry said. "What did you put in the drink?" "Nothing," Valentin insisted. "Why should I?" "So how come I found myself on the floor? How come the bad dreams?" "Butterfield," Valentin said. "Whatever you dreamt, he brought with him, believe me. I panicked as soon as I heard him in the house, I admit it. I know I should have warned you, but I knew if I didn't get out quickly, I wouldn't get out at all." "Are you telling me he would have killed you?" "Not personally, but yes." Harry looked incredulous. "We go way back, him and me." "He's welcome to you," Harry said, letting go of the tie. "I'm too damned tired to take any more of this shit." He turned from Valentin and began to walk away. "Wait," said the other man. "I know I wasn't too sweet with you back at the house, but you've got to understand things are going to get bad. For both of us." "I thought you said it was all over but the shouting." "I thought it was. I thought we had it all sewn up. Then Butterfield arrived, and I realized how naive I was being. They're not going to let Swan rest in peace. Not now, not ever. We have to save him, Damour." Harry stopped walking and studied the man's face. To pass him in the street, he mused, you wouldn't have taken him for a lunatic. "Did Butterfield go upstairs?" Valentin inquired. "Yes, he did. Why?" "Do you remember if he approached the casket?" Harry shook his head. "Good," said Valentin. "Then the defences are holding, which gives us a little time. Swan was a fine tactician, you know, but he could be careless. That was how they caught him. Sheer carelessness. He knew they were coming for him. I told him outright. I said we should cancel the remaining performances and go home. At least he had some sanctuary there. You think he was murdered? Jesus Christ, said Valentin, almost despairing of Harry. Of course he was murdered. So he's past saving, right? The man's dead. Dead, yes. Past saving? No. Do you talk gibberish to everyone? Valentin put his hand on Harry's shoulder. Oh, no, he said, with unfeigned sincerity. I don't trust anyone the way I trust you. This is very sudden, said Harry. May I ask why? Because you're in this up to your neck, the way I am, Valentin replied. No, I'm not, said Harry, but Valentin ignored the denial and went on with his talk. At the moment, we don't know how many of them there are, of course. They might simply have sent Butterfield, but I think that's unlikely. Who's Butterfield with? The Mafia? We should be so lucky, said Valentin. He reached in his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. This is the woman Swan was with, he said, the night at the theatre. It's possible she knows something of their strength. There was a witness? She didn't come forward, but yes, there was. I was his procurer, you see. I helped arrange his several adulteries so that none ever embarrassed him. See if you can get to her. He stopped abruptly. Somewhere close by music was being played. It sounded like a drunken jazz band extemporizing on bagpipes, a wheezing, rambling cacophony. Valentin's face instantly became a portrait of distress. God help us, he said softly, and began to back away from Harry. What's the problem? Do you know how to pray? Valentin asked him as he retreated down 83rd Street. The volume of the music was rising with every interval. I haven't prayed in 20 years, Harry replied. Then learn, came the response, and Valentin turned to run. As he did so, a ripple of darkness moved down the street from the north, dimming the lustre of bar signs and street lamps as it came. Neon announcements suddenly guttered and died. There were protests out of upstairs windows as the lights failed, and as if encouraged by the curses, the music took on a fresh and yet more hectic rhythm. Above his head, Harry heard a wailing sound, and looked up to see a ragged silhouette against the clouds, which trailed tendrils like a man-o'-war as it descended upon the street, leaving the stench of rotting fish in its wake. Its target was clearly Valentin. Harry shouted above the wail and the music and the panic from the blackout, but no sooner had he yelled than he heard Valentin shout out from the darkness, a pleading cry that was rudely cut short. He stood in the murk, his feet unwilling to carry him a step nearer the place from which the plea had come. The smell still stung his nostrils. Nosing it, his nausea returned. And then, so did the lights, a wave of power igniting the lamps and the bar signs as it washed back down the street. It reached Harry and moved on to the spot where he had last seen Valentin. It was deserted. Indeed, the sidewalk was empty all the way down to the next intersection. The drivelling jazz had stopped. Eyes peeled for man, beast, or the remnants of either, Harry wandered down the sidewalk. 20 yards from where he had been standing, the concrete was wet. Not with blood, he was pleased to see. The fluid was the colour of bile, and stank to high heaven. Among the splashes were several slivers of what might have been human tissue. Evidently Valentin had fought and succeeded in opening a wound in his attacker. There were more traces of the blood farther down the sidewalk, as if the injured thing had crawled some way before taking flight again. With Valentin, presumably. In the face of such strength, Harry knew his meagre powers would have availed him not at all, but he felt guilty nevertheless. He'd heard the cry, seen the assailant swoop, and yet fear had sealed his soles to the ground. He'd last felt fear the equal of this in Wyckoff Street, when Mimi Lomax's demon lover had finally thrown off any pretence to humanity. The room had filled with the stink of ether and human dirt, and the demon had stood there in its appalling nakedness and shown him scenes that had turned his bowels to water. They were with him now, those scenes. They would be with him forever. He looked down at the scrap of paper Valentin had given him. The name and address had been rapidly scrawled, but they were just decipherable. A wise man, Harry reminded himself, would tear this note up and throw it down into the gutter. But if the events in Wyckoff Street had taught him anything, it was that once touched by such malignancy as he had seen and dreamt in the last few hours, there could be no casual disposal of it. He had to follow it to its source, however repugnant that thought was, and make with it whatever bargains the strength of his hand allowed. There was no good time to do business like this. The present would have to suffice. He walked back to Lexington and caught the cab to the address on the paper. He got no response from the bell marked Bernstein, but roused the doorman and engaged in a frustrating debate with him through the glass door. The man was angry to have been raised at such an hour. Miss Bernstein was not in her apartment, he insisted, and remained untouched, even when Harry intimated that there might be some life-or-death urgency in the matter. It was only when he produced his wallet that the fellow displayed the least flicker of concern. Finally, he let Harry in. "She's not up there," he said, pocketing the bills. "She's not been in for days." Harry took the elevator. His shins were aching and his back too. He wanted sleep, bourbon, then sleep. There was no reply at the apartment as the doorman had predicted, but he kept knocking and calling her. "Miss Bernstein, are you there?" There was no sign of life from within, not, at least, until he said, "I want to talk about Swan." He heard an intake of breath close to the door. "Is somebody there?" he asked. "Please, answer. There's nothing to be afraid of." After several seconds, a slurred and melancholy voice murmured, "Swan's dead." At least she wasn't, Harry thought. Whatever forces had snatched Valentin away, they had not yet reached this corner of Manhattan. "May I talk to you?" he requested. "No," she replied. Her voice was a candle flame on the verge of extinction. "Just a few questions, Barbara." "I'm in the tiger's belly," the slow reply came, "and it doesn't want me to let you in." Perhaps they had got here before him. "Can't you reach the door?" he coaxed her. "It's not so far." "But it's eaten me," she said. "Try, Barbara. The tiger won't mind. Reach." There was silence from the other side of the door, then a shuffling sound. Was she doing as he had requested? It seemed so. He heard her fingers fumbling with the catch. "That's it," he encouraged her. "Can you turn it? Try to turn it." At the last instant he thought, suppose she's telling the truth, and there is a tiger in there with her. It was too late for retreat. The door was opening. There was no animal in the hallway, just a woman and the smell of dirt. She had clearly neither washed nor changed her clothes since fleeing from the theatre. The evening gown she wore was soiled and torn, her skin was grey with grime. He stepped into the apartment. She moved down the hallway away from him, desperate to avoid his touch. "It's all right," he said. "There's no tiger here." Her wide eyes were almost empty. What presence roved there was lost to sanity. "All there is," she said. "I'm in the tiger. I'm in it forever." As he had neither the time nor the skill required to dissuade her from this madness, he decided it was wiser to go with it. "How did you get there?" he asked her. "Into the tiger. Was it when you were with Swan?" She nodded. "You remember that, do you?" "Oh, yes." "What do you remember?" "There was a sword. It fell. He was picking up—" She stopped and frowned. "Picking up what?" She seemed suddenly more distracted than ever. "How can you hear me," she wondered, "when I'm in the tiger? Are you in the tiger, too?" "Maybe I am," he said, not wanting to analyze the metaphor too closely. "We're here forever, you know," she informed him. "We'll never be let out." "Who told you that?" She didn't reply, but cocked her head a little. "Can you hear?" she said. "Hear?" She took another step back down the hallway. Harry listened, but he could hear nothing. The growing agitation on Barbara's face was sufficient to send him back to the front door and open it, however. The elevator was in operation. He could hear its soft hum across the landing. Worse. The lights in the hallway and on the stairs were deteriorating, the bulbs losing power with every foot the elevator ascended. He turned back into the apartment and went to take hold of Barbara's wrist. She made no protest. Her eyes were fixed on the doorway through which she seemed to know her judgment would come. "We'll take the stairs," he told her, and led her out onto the landing. The lights were within an ace of failing. He glanced up at the floor numbers being ticked off above the elevator doors. Was this the top floor they were on, or one shy of it? He couldn't remember, and there was no time to think before the lights went out entirely. He stumbled across the unfamiliar territory of the landing with the girl in tow, hoping to God he'd find the stairs before the elevator reached this floor. Barbara wanted to loiter, but he bullied her to pick up her pace. As his foot found the top stair, the elevator finished its ascent. The doors hissed open, and a cold fluorescence washed the landing. He couldn't see its source, nor did he wish to, but its effect was to reveal to the naked eye every stain and blemish, every sign of decay and creeping rot that the paintwork sought to camouflage. The show stole Harry's attention for a moment only. Then he took a firmer hold of the woman's hand, and they began their descent. Barbara was not interested in escape, however, but in events on the landing. Thus occupied, she tripped and fell heavily against Harry. The two would have toppled if he hadn't caught hold of the banister. Angered, he turned to her. They were out of sight of the landing, but the light crept down the stairs and washed over Barbara's face. Beneath its uncharitable scrutiny, Harry saw decay busy in her, saw rot in her teeth and the death in her skin and hair and nails. No doubt he would have appeared much the same to her, were she to have looked, but she was still staring back over her shoulder and up the stairs. The light source was on the move. Voices accompanied it. "The door's open," a woman said. "What are you waiting for?" a voice replied. It was Butterfield. Harry held both breath and wrist as the light source moved again, toward the door presumably, and then was partially eclipsed as it disappeared into the apartment. "We have to be quick," he told Barbara. She went with him down 3 or 4 steps, and then, without warning, her hand leapt for his face, nails opening his cheek. He let go of her hand to protect himself, and in that instant she was away, back up the stairs. He cursed and stumbled in pursuit of her, but her former sluggishness had lifted. She was startlingly nimble. By the dregs of light from the landing he watched her reach the top of the stairs and disappear from sight. "Here I am," she called out as she went. He stood immobile on the stairway, unable to decide whether to go or stay, and so unable to move at all. Ever since Wyckoff Street he'd hated stairs. Momentarily, the light from above flared up, throwing the shadows of the banisters across him, then it died again. He put his hand to his face. She had raised wheels, but there was little blood. What could he hope from her if he went to her aid? Only more of the same. She was a lost cause. Even as he despaired of her, he heard a sound from round the corner at the head of the stairs, a soft sound that might have been either a footstep or a sigh. Had she escaped their influence after all, or perhaps not even reached the apartment door, but thought better of it and about turned? Even as he was weighing up the odds, he heard her say, "Help me!" The voice was a ghost of a ghost, but it was indisputably hers, and she was in terror. He reached for his .38 and started up the stairs again. Even before he had turned the corner, he felt the nape of his neck itch as his hackles rose. She was there, but so was the tiger. It stood on the landing, mere feet from Harry, its body humming with latent power. Its eyes were molten, its open maw impossibly large. and there, already in its vast throat, was Barbara. He met her eyes out of the tiger's mouth and saw a flicker of comprehension in them that was worse than any madness. Then the beast threw its head back and forth to settle its prey in its gut. She had been swallowed whole, apparently. There was no blood on the landing, nor about the tiger's muzzle, only the appalling sight of the girl's face disappearing down the tunnel of the animal's throat. She loosed a final cry from the belly of the thing, and as it rose it seemed to Harry that the beast attempted a grin. Its face crinkled up grotesquely, the eyes narrowing like those of a laughing Buddha, the lips peeling back to expose a sickle of brilliant teeth. Behind this display the cry was finally hushed. In that instant the tiger leaped. Harry fired into its devouring bulk, and as the shot met its flesh, the leer and the maw and the whole striped mass of it unwove in a single beat. Suddenly it was gone, and there was only a drizzle of pastel confetti spiralling down around him. The shot had aroused interest. There were raised voices in one or two of the apartments, and the light that had accompanied Butterfield from the elevator was brightening through the open door of the Bernstein residence. He was almost tempted to stay and see the light bringer, but discretion bettered his curiosity, and he turned and made his descent, taking the stairs 2 and 3 at a time. The confetti tumbled after him, as if it had a life of its own. Barbara's life, perhaps, transformed into paper pieces and tossed away. He reached the lobby breathless. The doorman was standing there, staring up the stairs vacantly. "Somebody get shot?" he inquired. "No," said Harry. "Eaten." As he headed for the door, he heard the elevator start to hum as it descended. Perhaps merely a tenant coming down for a pre-dawn stroll. Perhaps not. He left the doorman as he had found him, sullen and confused, and made his escape into the street, putting 2 block lengths between him and the apartment building before he stopped running. They did not bother to come after him. He was beneath their concern, most likely. So, what was he to do now? Valentine was dead, Barbara Bernstein too. He was none the wiser now than he'd been at the outset, except that he'd learned again the lesson he'd been taught in Wyckoff Street, that when dealing with the gulfs, it was wiser never to believe your eyes. The moment you trusted your senses, the moment you believed a tiger to be a tiger, you were half theirs. Not a complicated lesson, but it seemed he had forgotten it, like a fool, and it had taken 2 deaths to teach it to him afresh. Maybe it would be simpler to have the rule tattooed on the back of his hand, so that he couldn't check the time without being reminded. Never believe your eyes. The principle was still fresh in his mind as he walked back toward his apartment, and a man stepped out of the doorway and said, "Harry." It looked like Valentine, a wounded Valentine, a Valentine who'd been dismembered and sewn together again by a committee of blind surgeons, but the same man in essence. But then, the tiger had looked like a tiger, hadn't it? "It's me," he said. "Oh, no," Harry said. "Not this time." "What are you talking about? It's Valentine." "So prove it." The other man looked puzzled. "This is no time for games," he said. "We're in desperate straits." Harry took his .38 from his pocket and pointed at Valentine's chest. "Prove it or I shoot you," he said. "Are you out of your mind?" "I saw you torn apart." "Not quite," said Valentine. His left arm was swathed in makeshift bandaging from fingertip to mid-bicep. "It was touch and go," he said, "but everything has its Achilles heel. It's just a question of finding the right spot." Harry peered at the man. He wanted to believe that this was indeed Valentine, but it was too incredible to believe that the frail form in front of him could have survived the monstrosity he'd seen on 83rd Street. No, this was another illusion, like the tiger, paper and malice. The man broke Harry's train of thought. "Your steak," he said. "My steak?" "You like it almost burned," Valentine said. "I protested, remember?" Harry remembered. "Go on," he said. And you said you hated the sight of blood, even if it wasn't your own. Yes, said Harry. His doubts were lifting. That's right. You asked me to prove I'm Valentine. That's the best I can do. Harry was almost persuaded. In God's name, Valentine said, do we have to debate this standing on the street? You'd better come in. The apartment was small, but tonight it felt more stifling than ever. Valentine sat himself down with a good view of the door. He refused spirits or first aid. Harry helped himself to bourbon. He was on his third shot when Valentine finally said, We have to go back to the house, Harry. What? We have to claim Swan's body before Butterfield. I did my best already. It's not my business anymore. So you leave Swan to the pit, Valentine said. She doesn't care. Why should I? You mean Dorothea? She doesn't know what Swan was involved with. That's why she's so trusting. She has suspicions, maybe, but insofar as it is possible to be guiltless in all of this, she is. He paused to adjust the position of his injured arm. She was a prostitute, you know. I don't suppose she told you that. Swan once said to me he married her because only prostitutes know the value of love. Harry let this apparent paradox go. Why did she stay with him? He asked. He wasn't exactly faithful, was he? She loved him, Valentine replied. It's not unheard of. And you? Oh, I loved him too, in spite of his stupidities. That's why we have to help him. If Butterfield and his associates get their hands on Swan's mortal remains, there'll be all hell to pay. I know. I got a glimpse of the Bernstein place. What did you see? Something and nothing, said Harry. A tiger, I thought. Only it wasn't. The old paraphernalia, Valentine commented. And there was something else with Butterfield, something that shed light. I didn't see what. The castrato, Valentine muttered to himself, clearly discomfited. We'll have to be careful. He stood up, the movement causing him to wince. I think we should be on our way, Harry. Are you paying me for this? Harry inquired, or am I doing it all for love? You're doing it because of what happened at Wyckoff Street, came the softly spoken reply. Because you lost poor Mimi Lomax to the Gulfs, and you don't want to lose Swan. That is, if you've not already done so. They caught a cab on Madison Avenue and headed back uptown to 61st Street, keeping their silence as they rode. Harry had 100 questions to ask of Valentine. Who was Butterfield, for one, and what was Swan's crime that he be pursued to death and beyond? So many puzzles. But Valentine looked sick and unfit for plying with questions. Besides, Harry sensed that the more he knew, the less enthusiastic he would be about the journey they were now taking. We have perhaps one advantage, Valentine said as they approached 61st Street. They can't be expecting this frontal attack. Butterfield presumes I'm dead and probably thinks you're hiding your head in mortal terror. I'm working on it. You're not in danger, Valentine replied. At least, not the way Swan is. If they were to take you apart limb by limb, it would be nothing beside the torments they have waiting for the magician. Illusionist, Harry corrected him, but Valentine shook his head. Magician he was. Magician he will always be. The driver interrupted before Harry could quote Dorothea on the subject. What number you people want? He said. Just drop us here on the right, Valentine instructed him, and wait for us, understand? Sure. Valentine turned to Harry. Give the man $50. 50? Do you want him to wait or not? Harry counted 4 tens and 10 singles into the driver's hand. You'd better keep the engine running, he said. Anything to oblige, the driver grinned. Harry joined Valentin on the sidewalk, and they walked the 25 yards to the house. The street was still noisy, despite the hour. The party that Harry had seen in preparation half a night ago was at its height. There was no sign of life at the Swan residence, however. Perhaps they don't expect us, Harry thought. Certainly this head-on assault was about the most foolhardy tactic imaginable, and as such might catch the enemy off guard. But were such forces ever off guard? Was there ever a minute in their maggoty lives when their eyelids drooped and sleep tamed them for a space? No. In Harry's experience, it was only the good who needed sleep. Iniquity and its practitioners were awake every eager moment, planning fresh felonies. "How do we get in?" he asked as they stood outside the house. "I have the key," Valentin replied, and went to the door. There was no retreat now. The key was turned, the door was open, and they were stepping out of the comparative safety of the street. The house was as dark within as it had appeared from without. There was no sound of human presence on any of the floors. Was it possible that the defences Swan had laid around his corpse had indeed rebuffed Butterfield, and that he and his cohorts had retreated? Valentin quashed such misplaced optimism almost immediately, taking hold of Harry's arm and leaning close to whisper, "They're here." This was not the time to ask Valentin how he knew, but Harry made a mental note to inquire when, or rather if, they got out of the house with their tongues still in their heads. Valentin was already on the stairs. Harry, his eyes still accustoming themselves to the vestigial light that crept in from the street, crossed the hallway after him. The other man moved confidently in the gloom, and Harry was glad of it. Without Valentin plucking at his sleeve and guiding him around the half-landing, he might well have crippled himself. Despite what Valentin had said, there was no more sound or sight of occupancy up here than there had been below, but as they advanced toward the master bedroom where Swan lay, a rotten tooth in Harry's lower jaw that had lately been quiescent began to throb afresh, and his bowels ached to break wind. The anticipation was crucifying. He felt a barely suppressible urge to yell out and to oblige the enemy to show its hand, if, indeed, it had hands to show. Valentin had reached the door. He turned his head in Harry's direction, and even in the murk it was apparent that fear was taking its toll on him too. His skin glistened. He stank of fresh sweat. He pointed toward the door. Harry nodded. He was as ready as he was ever going to be. Valentin reached for the door handle. The sound of the lock mechanism seemed deafeningly loud, but it brought no response from anywhere in the house. The door swung open, and the heady scent of flowers met them. They had begun to decay in the forced heat of the house. There was a rankness beneath the perfume. More welcome than the scent was the light. The curtains in the room had not been entirely drawn, and the street lamps described the interior. The flowers massed like clouds around the casket, the chair where Harry had sat, the Calvados bottle beside it, the mirror above the fireplace showing the room its secret self. Valentin was already moving across to the casket, and Harry heard him sigh as he set eyes on his old master. He wasted little time, but immediately set to lifting the lower half of the casket lid. It defeated his single arm, however, and Harry went to his assistance, eager to get the job done and be away. Touching the solid wood of the casket brought his nightmare back with breath-snatching force. The pit opening beneath him, the illusionist rising from his bed like a sleeper unwillingly woken. There was no such spectacle now, however. Indeed, a little life in the corpse might have made the job easier. Swan was a big man, and his limp body was uncooperative to a fault. The simple act of lifting him from his casket took all their breath and attention. He came at last, though reluctantly, his long limbs flopping about. "Now," said Valentin, "downstairs." As they moved to the door, something in the street ignited, or so it seemed, for the interior suddenly brightened. The light was not kind to their burden. It revealed the crudity of the cosmetics applied to Swan's face, and the burgeoning putrescence beneath. Harry had an instant only to appreciate these felicities, and then the light brightened again, and he realized that it wasn't outside, but in. He looked up at Valentin and almost despaired. The luminescence was even less charitable to servant than to master. It seemed to strip the flesh from Valentin's face. Harry caught only a glimpse of what it revealed beneath. Events stole his attention an instant later, but he saw enough to know that had Valentine not been his accomplice in this venture, he might well have run from him. "Get him out of here!" Valentine yelled. He let go of Swan's legs, leaving Harry to steer Swan single-handed. The corpse proved recalcitrant, however. Harry had only made 2 cursing steps toward the exit when things took a turn for the cataclysmic. He heard Valentine unloose an oath and looked up to see that the mirror had given up all pretense to reflection, and that something was moving up from its liquid depths, bringing the light with it. "What is it?" Harry breathed. "The castrato," came the reply. "Will you go?" There was no time to obey Valentine's panicked instruction, however, before the hidden thing broke the plane of the mirror and invaded the room. Harry had been wrong. It did not carry the light with it as it came. It was the light, or rather some holocaust blazed in its bowels, the glare of which escaped through the creature's body by whatever route it could. It had once been human, a mountain of a man with the belly and the breasts of a Neolithic Venus, but the fire in its body had twisted it out of true, breaking out through its palms and its navel, burning its mouth and nostrils into one ragged hole. It had, as its name implied, been unsexed. From that hole, too, light spilled. By it, the decay of the flowers speeded into seconds. The blossoms withered and died. The room was filled in moments with the stench of rotting vegetable matter. Harry heard Valentine call his name, once and again. Only then did he remember the body in his arms. He dragged his eyes from the hovering castrato and carried Swan another yard. The door was at his back and open. He dragged his burden out into the landing as the castrato kicked over the casket. He heard the din and then shouts from Valentine. There followed another terrible commotion and the high-pitched voice of the castrato talking through that hole in its face. "Die and be happy," it said, and a hail of furniture was flung against the wall with such force chairs embedded themselves in the plaster. Valentine had escaped the assault, however, or so it seemed, for an instant later Harry heard the castrato shriek. It was an appalling sound, pitiful and revolting. He would have stopped his ears but that he had his hands full. He had almost reached the top of the stairs. Dragging Swan a few steps farther, he laid the body down. The castrato's light was not dimmed, despite its complaints. It still flickered on the bedroom wall like a midsummer thunderstorm. For the 3rd time tonight, once on 83rd Street and again on the stairs of the Bernstein place, Harry hesitated. If he went back to help Valentine, perhaps there would be worse sights to see than ever Wyckoff Street had offered. But there could be no retreat this time. Without Valentine, he was lost. He raced back down the landing and flung open the door. The air was thick, the lamps rocking. In the middle of the room hung the castrato, still defying gravity. It had hold of Valentine by his hair. Its other hand was poised, first and middle fingers spread like twin horns, about to stab out its captive's eyes. Harry pulled his .38 from his pocket, aimed, and fired. He had always been a bad shot when given more than a moment to take aim, but in extremis, when instinct governed rational thought, he was not half bad. This was such an occasion. The bullet found the castrato's neck and opened another wound. More in surprise than pain, perhaps, it let Valentine go. There was a leakage of light from the hole in its neck, and it put its hand to the place. Valentine was quickly on his feet. "Again!" he called to Harry. "Fire again!" Harry obeyed the instruction. His second bullet pierced the creature's chest, his third its belly. This last wound seemed particularly traumatic. The distended flesh, ripe for bursting, broke, and the trickle of light that spilled from the wound rapidly became a flood as the abdomen split. Again the castrato howled, this time in panic, and lost all control of its flight. It reeled like a pricked balloon toward the ceiling, its fat hands desperately attempting to stem the mutiny in its substance. But it had reached critical mass. There was no making good the damage done. Lumps of its flesh began to break from it. Valentine, either too stunned or too fascinated, stood staring up at the disintegration while rains of cooked meat fell around him. Harry took hold of him and hauled him back toward the door. The castrato was finally earning its name, unloosing a desolate, ear-piercing note. Harry didn't wait to watch its demise, but slammed the bedroom door as the voice reached an awesome pitch and the windows smashed. Valentin was grinning. "Do you know what we did?" he said. "Never mind. Let's just get the fuck out of here." The sight of Swan's corpse at the top of the stairs seemed to chasten Valentin. Harry instructed him to assist, and he did so as efficiently as his dazed condition allowed. Together they began to escort the illusionist down the stairs. As they reached the front door, there was a final shriek from above as the castrato came apart at the seams. Then silence. The commotion had not gone unnoticed. Revellers had appeared from the house opposite. A crowd of late-night pedestrians had assembled on the sidewalk. "Some party," one of them said as the trio emerged. Harry had half expected the cab to have deserted them, but he had reckoned without the driver's curiosity. The man was out of his vehicle and staring up at the second-floor window. "Does he need a hospital?" he asked as they bundled Swan into the back of the cab. "No," Harry returned. "He's about as good as he's going to get." "Will you drive?" said Valentin. "Sure. Just tell me where to." "Anywhere," came the weary reply. "Just get out of here." "Hold it a minute," the driver said. "I don't want any trouble." "Then you'd better move," said Valentin. The driver met his passenger's gaze. Whatever he saw there, his next words were, "I'm driving." And they took off along East 61st like the proverbial bat out of hell. "We did it, Harry," Valentin said when they'd been travelling for a few minutes. "We got him back." "And that thing?" "Tell me about it." "The castrato?" "What's to tell? Butterfield must have left it as a watchdog until he could bring in a technician to decode Swan's defense mechanisms. We were lucky. It was in need of milking. That makes them unstable." "How do you know so much about all of this?" "It's a long story," said Valentin, "and not for a cab ride." "So what now? We can't drive round in circles all night." Valentin looked across at the body that sat between them, prey to every whim of the cab's suspension and road mender's craft. Gently he put Swan's hands on his lap. "You're right, of course," he said. "We have to make arrangements for the cremation as swiftly as possible." The cab bounced across a pothole. Valentin's face tightened. "Are you in pain?" Harry asked him. "I've been in worse." "We could go back to my apartment and rest there." Valentin shook his head. "Not very clever," he said. "It's the first place they'll look." "My office, then?" "The second place." "Well, Jesus, this cab's going to run out of gas eventually." At this point, the driver intervened. "Say, did you people mention cremation?" "Maybe," Valentin replied. "My brother-in-law's got a funeral business out in Queens." "Is that so?" said Harry. "Very reasonable rates. I can recommend him. No shit." "Could you contact him now?" Valentin said. "It's 2 a.m. "We're in a hurry." The driver reached up and adjusted his mirror. He was looking at Swan. "You don't mind me asking, do you?" he said. "But is that a body you got back there?" "It is," said Harry, "and he's getting impatient." The driver made a whooping sound. "Shit," he said. "I've had a woman drop twins in that seat. I've had whores do business. I even had an alligator back there one time. But this beats them all." He pondered for a moment, then said, "You kill him, did you?" "No," said Harry. "Guess we'd be heading for the East River if you had, eh?" "That's right. We just want a decent cremation, and quickly." "That's understandable." "What's your name?" Harry asked him. "Winston Jarrett, but everybody calls me Byron. I'm a poet, see? Leastways, I am on weekends." "Byron. See, any other driver would be freaked out, right? finding two guys with a body in the back seat, but the way I see it, it's all material. For the poems. Right, said Byron. The muse is a fickle mistress. You have to take it where you find it, you know. Speaking of which, you gentlemen got any idea where you want to go? Make it your offices, Valentin told Harry, and he can call his brother-in-law. Good, said Harry. Then, to Byron, head west along 45th Street to 8th. You got it, said Byron, and the cab's speed doubled in the space of 20 yards. Say, he said, you guys fancy a poem? Now? Said Harry. I like to improvise, Byron replied. Pick a subject, any subject. Valentin hugged his wounded arm close. Quietly he said, How about the end of the world? Good subject, the poet replied. Just give me a minute or two. So soon? Said Valentin. They took a circuitous route to the office, while Byron Jowett tried a selection of rhymes for Apocalypse. The sleepwalkers were out on 45th Street, in search of one high or another. Some sat in the doorways, one lay sprawled across the sidewalk. None of them gave the cab or its occupants more than the briefest perusal. Harry unlocked the front door, and he and Byron carried Swan up to the 3rd floor. The office was home away from home, cramped and chaotic. They put Swan in the swivel chair behind the furred coffee cups and the alimony demands heaped on the desk. He looked easily the healthiest of the quartet. Byron was sweating like a bull after the climb. Harry felt, and surely looked, as though he hadn't slept in 60 days. Valentin sat slumped in the client's chair, so drained of vitality he might have been at death's door. You look terrible, Harry told him. No matter, he said. It'll all be done soon. Harry turned to Byron. How about calling this brother-in-law of yours? While Byron set to doing so, Harry returned his attention to Valentin. I've got a first-aid box somewhere about, he said. Shall I bandage up that arm? Thank you, but no. Like you, I hate the sight of blood, especially my own. Byron was on the phone, chastising his brother-in-law for his ingratitude. What's your beef? I got you a client. I know the time, for Christ's sake, but business is business. Tell him we'll pay double his normal rate, Valentin said. You hear that, Mel? Twice your usual fee, so get over here, will you? He gave the address to his brother-in-law and put down the receiver. He's coming over, he announced. Now? Said Harry. Now. Byron glanced at his watch. My belly thinks my throat's cut. How about we eat? You got an all-night place near here? There's one a block down from here. You want food? Byron asked Valentin. I don't think so, he said. He was looking worse by the moment. Okay, Byron said to Harry. Just you and me, then. You got 10 I could borrow? Harry gave him a bill, the keys to the street door, and an order for doughnuts and coffee, and Byron went on his way. Only when he'd gone did Harry wish he'd convinced the poet to stave off his hunger pangs a while. The office was distressingly quiet without him. Swan in residence behind the desk, Valentin succumbing to sleep in the other chair. The hush brought to mind another such silence during that last awesome night at the Lomax house, when Mimi's demon lover, wounded by Father Hess, had slipped away into the walls for a while and left them waiting and waiting, knowing it would come back but not certain of when or how. 6 hours they'd sat, Mimi occasionally breaking the silence with laughter or gibberish, and the first Harry had known of its return was the smell of cooking excrement and Mimi's cry of "Sodomite!" as Hess surrendered to an act his faith had too long forbidden him. There had been no more silence then, not for a long space, only Hess's cries and Harry's pleas for forgetfulness. They had all gone unanswered. It seemed he could hear the demon's voice now, its demands, its invitations. But no, it was only Valentin. The man was tossing his head back and forth in sleep, his face knotted up. Suddenly he started from his chair, one word on his lips. "Swan!" His eyes opened, and as they alighted on the illusionist's body, which was propped in the chair opposite, tears came uncontrollably, racking him. "He's dead," he said. as though in his dream he had forgotten that bitter fact. "I failed him, d'amour. That's why he's dead, because of my negligence." "You're doing your best for him now," Harry said, though he knew the words were poor compensation. "Nobody could ask for a better friend." "I was never his friend," Valentin said, staring at the corpse with brimming eyes. "I always hoped he'd one day trust me entirely, but he never did." "Why not?" "He couldn't afford to trust anybody, not in his situation." He wiped his cheeks with the back of his hand. "Maybe," Harry said, "it's about time you told me what all this is about." "If you want to hear." "I want to hear." "Very well," said Valentin. 32 years ago, Swann made a bargain with the Gulfs. He agreed to be an ambassador for them if they, in return, gave him magic. Magic? The ability to perform miracles, to transform matter, to bewitch souls, even to drive out God. "That's a miracle?" "It's more difficult than you think," Valentin replied. "So Swann was a genuine magician?" "Indeed he was." "Then why didn't he use his powers?" "He did," Valentin replied. "He used them every night, at every performance." Harry was baffled. "I don't follow." "Nothing the Prince of Lies offers to humankind is of the least value," Valentin said, "or it wouldn't be offered. Swann didn't know that when he first made his covenant, but he soon learned. Miracles are useless. Magic is a distraction from the real concerns. It's rhetoric, melodrama." "So, what exactly are the real concerns?" "You should know better than I," Valentin replied. "Fellowship, maybe? Curiosity? Certainly, it matters not in the least if water can be made into wine, or Lazarus to live another year." Harry saw the wisdom of this, but not how it had brought the magician to Broadway. As it was, he didn't need to ask. Valentin had taken up the story afresh. His tears had cleared with the telling. Some trace of animation had crept back into his features. "It didn't take Swann long to realize he'd sold his soul for a mess of pottage," he explained. "And when he did, he was inconsolable. At least he was for a while. Then he began to contrive a revenge." "How?" "By taking Hell's name in vain, by using the magic which it boasted of as a trivial entertainment, degrading the power of the Gulfs by passing off their wonder-working as mere illusion. It was, you see, an act of heroic perversity. Every time a trick of Swann's was explained away as sleight of hand, the Gulfs squirmed." "Why didn't they kill him?" Harry said. "Oh, they tried. Many times. But he had allies, agents in their camp who warned him of their plots against him. He escaped their retribution for years that way." "Until now?" "Until now," Valentin sighed. "He was careless, and so was I. Now he's dead, and the Gulfs are itching for him." "I see." "But we were not entirely unprepared for this eventuality. He had made his apologies to heaven, and I dare to hope he's been forgiven his trespasses. Pray that he has. There's more than his salvation at stake tonight." "Yours too?" "All of us who loved him are tainted," Valentin replied. "But if we can destroy his physical remains before the Gulfs claim them, we may yet avoid the consequences of his covenant." "Why did you wait so long? Why didn't you just cremate him the day he died?" "Their lawyers are not fools. The covenant specifically prescribes a period of lying in state. If we had attempted to ignore that clause, his soul would have been forfeited automatically." "So when is this period up?" 3 hours ago, at midnight," Valentin replied. "That's why they're so desperate, you see. And so dangerous." Another poem came to Byron Jowett as he ambled back up 8th Avenue, working his way through a tuna salad sandwich. His muse was not to be rushed. Poems could take as long as 5 minutes to be finalized, longer if they involved a double rhyme. He didn't hurry on his journey back to the offices, therefore, but wandered in a dreamy sort of mood, turning the lines every which way to make them fit. That way he hoped to arrive back with another finished poem. 2 in one night was damn good going. He had not perfected the final couplet, however, by the time he reached the door. Operating on automatic pilot, he fumbled in his pocket for the keys Damour had loaned him and let himself in. He was about to close the door again when a woman stepped through the gap, smiling at him. She was a beauty, and Byron, being a poet, was a fool for beauty. "Please," she said to him, "I need your help." "What can I do for you?" said Byron through a mouthful of food. "Do you know a man by the name of Damour? Harry Damour?" "Indeed I do. I'm going up to his place right now." "Perhaps you could show me the way," the woman asked him as Byron closed the door. "Be my pleasure," he replied, and led her across the lobby to the bottom of the stairs. "You know, you're very sweet," she told him, and Byron melted. Valentin stood at the window. "Something wrong?" Harry asked. "Just a feeling," Valentin commented. "I have a suspicion maybe the devil's in Manhattan." "So what's new?" "That maybe he's coming for us." As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Harry jumped. "It's all right," Valentin said. "He never knocks." Harry went to the door, feeling like a fool. "Is that you, Byron?" he asked before unlocking it. "Please," said a voice he thought he'd never hear again. "Help me." He opened the door. It was Dorothea, of course. She was colourless as water and as unpredictable. Even before Harry had invited her across the office threshold, a dozen expressions or hints of such had crossed her face. Anguish, suspicion, terror. And now, as her eyes alighted upon the body of her beloved Swan, relief and gratitude. "You do have him," she said, stepping into the office. Harry closed the door. There was a chill from up the stairs. "Thank God! Thank God!" She took Harry's face in her hands and kissed him lightly on the lips. Only then did she notice Valentin. She dropped her hands. "What's he doing here?" she asked. "He's with me. With us." She looked doubtful. "No," she said. "We can trust him." "I said no! Get him out, Harry!" There was a cold fury in her. She shook with it. "Get him out!" Valentin stared at her, glassy-eyed. "The lady doth protest too much," he murmured. Dorothea put her fingers to her lips as if to stifle any further outburst. "I'm sorry," she said, turning back to Harry, "but you must be told what this man is capable of." "Without him, your husband would still be at the house, Mrs. Swan," Harry pointed out. "He's the one you should be grateful to, not me." At this, Dorothea's expression softened, through bafflement, to a new gentility. "Oh?" she said. Now she looked back at Valentin. "I'm sorry. When you ran from the house, I assumed some complicity." "With whom?" Valentin inquired. She made a tiny shake of her head, then said, "Your arm. Are you hurt?" "A minor injury," he returned. "I've already tried to get it rebandaged," Harry said, "but the bastard's too stubborn." "Stubborn I am," Valentin replied without inflection. "But we'll be finished here soon," said Harry. Valentin broke in. "Don't tell her anything," he snapped. "I'm just going to explain about the brother-in-law," Harry said. "The brother-in-law?" Dorothea said, sitting down. The sigh of her legs crossing was the most enchanting sound Harry had heard in 24 hours. "Oh, please tell me about the brother-in-law." Before Harry could open his mouth to speak, Valentin said, "It's not her, Harry." The words, spoken without a trace of drama, took a few seconds to make sense. Even when they did, their lunacy was self-evident. Here she was, in the flesh, perfect in every detail. "What are you talking about?" Harry said. "How much more plainly can I say it?" Valentin replied. "It's not her. It's a trick, an illusion, They know where we are, and they sent this up to spy out our defenses." Harry would have laughed, but that these accusations were bringing tears to Dorothea's eyes. "Stop it," he told Valentine. "No, Harry. You think for a moment. All the traps they've laid, all the beasts they've mustered. You suppose she could have escaped that?" He moved away from the window toward Dorothea. "Where's Butterfield?" he spat. "Down the hall, waiting for your signal?" "Shut up," said Harry. "He's scared to come up here himself, isn't he?" Valentine went on. "Scared of Swan, scared of us, probably, after what we did to his gelding." Dorothea looked at Harry. "Make him stop," she said. Harry halted Valentine's advance with a hand on his bony chest. "You heard the lady," he said. "That's no lady," Valentine replied, his eyes blazing. "I don't know what it is, but it's no lady." Dorothea stood up. "I came here because I hoped I'd be safe," she said. "You are safe," Harry said. "Not with him around, I'm not," she replied, looking back at Valentine. "I think I'd be wiser going." Harry touched her arm. "No," he told her. "Mr. D'Amour," she said sweetly, "you've already earned your fee 10 times over. Now I think it's time I took responsibility for my husband." Harry scanned that mercurial face. There wasn't a trace of deception in it. "I have a car downstairs," she said. "I wonder, could you carry him downstairs for me?" Harry heard a noise like a cornered dog behind him and turned to see Valentine standing beside Swan's corpse. He had picked up the heavy-duty cigarette lighter from the desk and was flicking it. Sparks came, but no flame. "What the hell are you doing?" Harry demanded. Valentine didn't look at the speaker, but at Dorothea. "She knows," he said. He got the knack of the lighter. The flame flared up. Dorothea made a small, desperate sound. "Please, don't," she said. "We all burn with him if necessary," Valentine said. "He's insane." Dorothea's tears had suddenly gone. "She's right," Harry told Valentine. "You're acting like a madman." "And you're a fool to fall for a few tears," came the reply. "Can't you see that if she takes him we've lost everything we've fought for?" "Don't listen," she murmured. "You know me, Harry. You trust me." "What's under that face of yours?" Valentine said. "What are you? A coprolite? Homunculus?" The names meant nothing to Harry. All he knew was the proximity of the woman at his side, her hand laid upon his arm. "And what about you?" she said to Valentine. Then more softly, "Why don't you show us your wound?" She forsook the shelter of Harry's side and crossed to the desk. The lighter flame guttered at her approach. "Go on," she said, her voice no louder than a breath. "I dare you." She glanced round at Harry. "Ask him, D'Amour," she said. "Ask him to show you what he's got hidden under the bandages." "What's she talking about?" Harry asked. The glimmer of trepidation in Valentine's eyes was enough to convince Harry there was merit in Dorothea's request. "Explain," he said. Valentine didn't get the chance, however. Distracted by Harry's demand, he was easy prey when Dorothea reached across the desk and knocked the lighter from his hand. He bent to retrieve it, but she seized on the ad hoc bundle of bandaging and pulled. It tore and fell away. She stepped back. "See?" she said. Valentine stood revealed. The creature on 83rd Street had torn the sham of humanity from his arm. The limb beneath was a mass of blue-black scales. Each digit of the blistered hand ended in a nail that opened and closed like a parrot's beak. He made no attempt to conceal the truth. Shame eclipsed every other response. "I warned you," she said. "I warned you he wasn't to be trusted." Valentine stared at Harry. "I have no excuses," he said. "I only ask you to believe that I want what's best for Swan." "How can you?" Dorothea said. "You're a demon." "More than that," Valentine replied. "I'm Swan's tempter, his familiar, his creature. But I belong to him more than I ever belonged to the Gulfs, and I will defy them." He looked at Dorothea. "And their agents." She turned to Harry. "You have a gun," she said. "Shoot the filth! You mustn't suffer a thing like that to live." Harry looked at the pustulant arm, at the clacking fingernails. What further repugnance was there in weight behind the flesh facade? "Shoot it!" the woman said. He took his gun from his pocket. Valentine seemed to have shrunk in the moments since the revelation of his true nature. Now he leaned against the wall, his face slimy with despair. "Kill me, then," he said to Harry. "Kill me if I revolt you so much. But, Harry, I beg you, don't give Swan to her. Promise me that. Wait for the driver to come back and dispose of the body by whatever means you can. Just don't give it to her." "Don't listen," Dorothea said. "He doesn't care about Swan the way I do." Harry raised the gun. Even looking straight at death, Valentine did not flinch. "You failed, Judas," she said to Valentine. "The magician's mine." "What magician?" said Harry. "Why, Swan, of course," she replied lightly. "How many magicians have you got up here?" Harry dropped his bead on Valentine. "He's an illusionist," he said. "You told me that at the very beginning. Never call him a magician, you said." "Don't be pedantic," she replied, trying to laugh off her faux pas. He levelled the gun at her. She threw back her head suddenly, her face contracting, and unloosed a sound of which, had Harry not heard it from a human throat, he would not have believed the larynx capable. It rang down the corridor and the stairs in search of some waiting ear. "Butterfield is here," said Valentine flatly. Harry nodded. In the same moment she came toward him, her features grotesquely contorted. She was strong and quick, a blur of venom that took him off guard. He heard Valentine tell him to kill her before she transformed. It took him a moment to grasp the significance of this, by which time she had her teeth at his throat. One of her hands was a cold vice around his wrist. He sensed strength in her sufficient to powder his bones. His fingers were already numbed by her grip. He had no time to do more than depress the trigger. The gun went off. Her breath on his throat seemed to gush from her. Then she loosed her hold on him and staggered back. The shot had blown open her abdomen. He shook to see what he had done. The creature, for all its shriek, still resembled a woman he might have loved. "Good," said Valentine, as the blood hit the office floor in gouts. "Now it must show itself." Hearing him, she shook her head. "This is all there is to show," she said. Harry threw the gun down. "My God," he said softly. "It's her." Dorothea grimaced. The blood continued to come. "Some part of her," she replied. "Have you always been with them, then?" Valentine asked. "Of course not." "Why, then?" "Nowhere to go," she said, her voice fading by the syllable. "Nothing to believe in. All lies. Everything. Lies." "So you sided with Butterfield?" "Better hell," she said, "than a false heaven." "Who taught you that?" Harry murmured. "Who do you think?" she replied, turning her gaze on him. Though her strength was going out of her with the blood, her eyes still blazed. "You're finished, Amour," she said. "You and the demon and Swan. There's nobody left to help you now." Despite the contempt in her words, he couldn't stand and watch her bleed to death. Ignoring Valentine's imperative that he keep clear, he went across to her. As he stepped within range, she lashed out at him with astonishing force. The blow blinded him a moment. He fell against the tall filing cabinet, which toppled sideways. He and it hit the ground together. It spilled papers, he curses. He was vaguely aware that the woman was moving past him to escape, but he was too busy keeping his head from spinning to prevent her. When equilibrium returned, she had gone, leaving her bloody handprints on wall and door. Chaplin, the janitor, was protective of his territory. The basement of the building was a private domain in which he sorted through office trash and fed his beloved furnace and read aloud his favourite passages from the good book, all without fear of interruption. His bowels, which were far from healthy, allowed him little slumber. A couple of hours a night, no more, which he supplemented with dozing through the day. It was not so bad. He had the seclusion of the basement to retire to whenever life upstairs became too demanding, and the forced heat would sometimes bring strange waking dreams. Was this such a dream, this insipid fellow in his fine suit? If not, how had he gained access to the basement when the door was locked and bolted? He asked no questions of the intruder. Something about the way the man stared at him baffled his tongue. "Chaplain," the fellow said, his thin lips barely moving, "I'd like you to open the furnace." In other circumstances he might well have picked up his shovel and clouted the stranger across the head. The furnace was his baby. He knew, as no one else knew, its quirks and occasional petulance. He loved, as no one else loved, the roar it gave when it was content. He did not take kindly to the proprietorial tone the man used, but he'd lost the will to resist. He picked up a rag and opened the peeling door, offering its hot heart to this man as Lot had offered his daughters to the stranger in Sodom. Butterfield smiled at the smell of heat from the furnace. From 3 floors above he heard the woman crying out for help, and then, a few moments later, a shot. She had failed. He had thought she would. But her life was forfeit anyway. There was no loss in sending her into the breach, in the slim chance that she might have coaxed the body from its keepers. It would have saved the inconvenience of a full-scale attack, but no matter. To have Swan's soul was worth any effort. He had defiled the good name of the Prince of Lies. For that he would suffer as no other miscreant magician ever had. Besides Swan's punishment, Faust's would be an inconvenience, and Napoleon's a pleasure cruise. As the echoes of the shot died above, he took the black lacquer box from his jacket pocket. The janitor's eyes were turned heavenward. He too had heard the shot. "It was nothing," Butterfield told him. "Stoke the fire." Chaplain obeyed. The heat in the cramped basement rapidly grew. The janitor began to sweat. His visitor did not. He stood mere feet from the open furnace door and gazed into the brightness with impassive features. At last he seemed satisfied. "Enough," he said, and opened the lacquer box. Chaplain thought he glimpsed movement in the box, as though it were full to the lid with maggots, but before he had a chance to look more closely, both the box and contents were pitched into the flames. "Close the door," Butterfield said. Chaplain obeyed. "You may watch over them a while, if it pleases you. They need the heat. It makes them mighty." He left the janitor to keep his vigil beside the furnace and went back up to the hallway. He had left the street door open, and a pusher had come in out of the cold to do business with a client. They bartered in the shadows until the pusher caught sight of the lawyer. "Don't mind me," Butterfield said, and started up the stairs. He found the widow Swan on the first landing. She was not quite dead, but he quickly finished the job Damour had started. "We're in trouble," said Valentine. "I hear noises downstairs. Is there any other way out of here?" Harry sat on the floor, leaning against the toppled cabinet, and tried not to think of Dorothea's face as the bullet found her, or of the creature he was now reduced to needing. "There's a fire escape," he said. "It runs down to the back of the building." "Show me," said Valentine, attempting to haul him to his feet. "Keep your hands off me." Valentine withdrew, bruised by the rebuff. "I'm sorry," he said. "Maybe I shouldn't hope for your acceptance, but I do." Harry said nothing, just got to his feet among the litter of reports and photographs. He'd had a dirty life, spying on adulteries for vengeful spouses, dredging gutters for lost children, keeping company with scum because it rose to the top and the rest just drowned. Could Valentine's soul be much grimier? "The fire escape's down the hall," he said. "We can still get Swan out," Valentine said. "Still give him a decent cremation." The demon's obsession with his master's dignity was chastening in its way. "But you have to help me, Harry." "I'll help you," he said, avoiding sight of the creature. "Just don't expect love and affection." If it were possible to hear a smile, that's what he heard. "They want this over and done with before dawn," the demon said. "It can't be far from that now." "An hour, maybe," Valentin replied, "but it's enough. Either way, it's enough." The sound of the furnace soothed Chaplin. Its rumbles and rattlings were as familiar as the complaint of his own intestines. But there was another sound growing behind the door, the like of which he'd never heard before. His mind made foolish pictures to go with it, of pigs laughing, of glass and barbed wire being ground between the teeth, of hoofed feet dancing on the door. As the noises grew, so did his trepidation, but when he went to the basement door to summon help, it was locked. The key had gone. And now, as if matters weren't bad enough, the light went out. He began to fumble for a prayer. "Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour." But he stopped when a voice addressed him quite clearly. "Michaelmas," it said. It was unmistakably his mother, and there could be no doubt of its source either. It came from the furnace. "Michaelmas," she demanded, "are you going to let me cook in here?" It wasn't possible, of course, that she was there in the flesh. She'd been dead 13 long years. But some phantom, perhaps? He believed in phantoms. Indeed, he'd seen them on occasion, coming and going from the cinemas on 42nd Street, arm in arm. "Open up, Michaelmas," his mother told him, in that special voice she used when she had some treat for him. Like a good child, he approached the door. He had never felt such heat off the furnace as he felt now. He could smell the hairs on his arms wither. "Open the door," Mother said again. There was no denying her. Despite the searing air, he reached to comply. "That fucking janitor," said Harry, giving the sealed fire escape door a vengeful kick. "This door's supposed to be left unlocked at all times." He pulled at the chains that were wrapped around the handles. "We'll have to take the stairs." There was a noise from back down the corridor, a roar in the heating system which made the antiquated radiators rattle. At that moment, down in the basement, Michaelmas Chaplin was obeying his mother and opening the furnace door. A scream climbed from below as his face was blasted off, then the sound of the basement door being smashed open. Harry looked at Valentin, his repugnance momentarily forgotten. "We shan't be taking the stairs," the demon said. Bellowings and chatterings and screechings were already on the rise. Whatever had found birth in the basement, it was precocious. "We have to find something to break down the door," Valentin said. "Anything." Harry tried to think his way through the adjacent offices, his mind's eye peeled for some tool that would make an impression on either the fire door or the substantial chains which kept it closed. But there was nothing useful, only typewriters and filing cabinets. "Think, man," said Valentin. He ransacked his memory. Some heavy-duty instrument was required, a crowbar, a hammer, an axe. There was an agent called Shapiro on the floor below who exclusively represented porno performers, one of whom had attempted to blow his balls off the month before. She'd failed, but he'd boasted one day on the stairs that he had now purchased the biggest axe he could find and would happily take the head of any client who attempted an attack upon his person. The commotion from below was simmering down. The hush was, in its way, more distressing than the din that had preceded it. "We haven't got much time," the demon said. Harry left him at the chained door. "Can you get Swan?" he said as he ran. "I'll do my best." By the time Harry reached the top of the stairs, the last chatterings were dying away. As he began down the flight, they ceased altogether. There was no way now to judge how close the enemy were. On the next floor? Round the next corner? He tried not to think of them, but his feverish imagination populated every dirty shadow. He reached the bottom of the flight without incident, however, and slunk along the darkened second-floor corridor to Shapiro's office. Halfway to his destination, he heard a low hiss behind him. He looked over his shoulder, his body itching to run. One of the radiators, heated beyond its limits, had sprung a leak. Steam was escaping from its pipes and hissing as it went. He let his heart climb down out of his mouth, and then hurried on to the door of Shapiro's office, praying that the man hadn't simply been shooting the breeze with his talk of axes. If so, they were done for. The office was locked, of course, but he elbowed the frosted glass out and reached through to let himself in, fumbling for the light switch. The walls were plastered with photographs of sex goddesses. They scarcely claimed Harry's attention. His panic fed upon itself with every heartbeat he spent there. Clumsily, he scoured the office, turning furniture over in his impatience. But there was no sign of Shapiro's axe. Now, another noise from below. It crept up the staircase and along the corridor in search of him, an unearthly cacophony like the one he'd heard on 83rd Street. It set his teeth on edge. The nerve of his rotting molar began to throb afresh. What did the music signal? Their advance? In desperation, he crossed to Shapiro's desk to see if the man had any other item that might be pressed into service, and there, tucked out of sight between desk and wall, he found the axe. He pulled it from hiding. As Shapiro had boasted, it was hefty, its weight the first reassurance Harry had felt in too long. He returned to the corridor. The steam from the fractured pipe had thickened. Through its veils, it was apparent that the concert had taken on new fervour. The doleful wailing rose and fell, punctuated by some flaccid percussion. He braved the cloud of steam and hurried to the stairs. As he put his foot on the bottom step, the music seemed to catch him by the back of the neck and whisper, "Listen," in his ear. He had no desire to listen. The music was vile. But somehow, while he was distracted by finding the axe, it had wormed its way into his skull. It drained his limbs of strength. In moments the axe began to seem an impossible burden. "Come on down," the music coaxed him. "Come on down and join the band." Though he tried to form the simple word, no, the music was gaining influence upon him with every note played. He began to hear melodies in the caterwauling, long, circuitous themes that made his blood sluggish and his thoughts idiot. He knew there was no pleasure to be had at the music's source, that it tempted him only to pain and desolation, yet he could not shake off its delirium. His feet began to move to the call of the pipers. He forgot Valentine, Swan, and all ambition for escape, and instead began to descend the stairs. The melody became more intricate. He could hear voices now, singing some charmless accompaniment in a language he didn't comprehend. From somewhere above, he heard his name called, but he ignored the summons. The music clutched him close, and now, as he descended the next flight of stairs, the musicians came into view. They were brighter than he had anticipated, and more various, more baroque in their configurations, the manes, the multiple heads, more particular in their decoration, the suit of flayed faces, the rouged anus, and his drugged eyes now stung to see, more atrocious in their choice of instruments. Such instruments. Byron was there, his bones sucked clean and drilled with stops, his bladder and lungs teased through slashes in his body as reservoirs for the piper's breath. He was draped, inverted across the musician's lap, and even now was played upon, the sax ballooning, the tongueless head giving out a wheezing note. Dorothea was slumped beside him, no less transformed, the strings of her gut made taut between her splintered legs like an obscene lyre, her breasts drummed upon. There were other instruments too, men who had come off the street and fallen prey to the band. Even Chaplin was there, much of his flesh burned away, his rib-cage played upon indifferently well. "I didn't take you for a music lover," Butterfield said, drawing upon a cigarette and smiling in welcome. "Put down your axe and join us." The word axe reminded Harry of the weight in his hands, though he couldn't find his way through the bars of music to remember what it signified. "Don't be afraid," Butterfield said. "You're an innocent in this. We hold no grudge against you." "Dorothea," he said. "She was an innocent too," said the lawyer, "until we showed her some sights." Harry looked at the woman's body, at the terrible changes that they had wrought upon her. Seeing them, a tremor began in him, and something came between him and the music. The imminence of tears blotted it out. "Put down the axe," Butterfield told him. But the sound of the concert could not compete with the grief that was mounting in him. Butterfield seemed to see the change in his eyes, the disgust and anger growing there. He dropped his half-smoked cigarette and signalled for the music-making to stop. "Must it be death, then?" Butterfield said. But the inquiry was scarcely voiced before Harry started down the last few stairs toward him. He raised the axe and swung it at the lawyer, but the blow was misplaced. The blade ploughed the plaster of the wall, missing its target by a foot. At this eruption of violence, the musicians threw down their instruments and began across the lobby, trailing their coats and tails in blood and grease. Harry caught their advance from the corner of his eye. Behind the horde, still rooted in the shadows, was another form, larger than the largest of the mustered demons, from which there now came a thump that might have been that of a vast jackhammer. He tried to make sense of sound or sight, but could do neither. There was no time for curiosity. The demons were almost upon him. Butterfield glanced round to encourage their advance, and Harry, catching the moment, swung the axe a second time. The blow caught Butterfield's shoulder. The arm was instantly severed. The lawyer shrieked. Blood sprayed the wall. There was no time for a third blow, however. The demons were reaching for him, smiles lethal. He turned on the stairs and began up them, taking the steps 2, 3, and 4 at a time. Butterfield was still shrieking below. From the flight above, he heard Valentin calling his name. He had neither time nor breath to answer. They were on his heels, their ascent a din of grunts and shouts and beating wings. And behind it all, the jackhammer thumped its way to the bottom of the flight, its noise more intimidating by far than the chatterings of the berserkers at his back. It was in his belly, that thump, in his bowels, like death's heartbeat, steady and irrevocable. On the second landing, he heard a whirring sound behind him, and half turned to see a human-headed moth the size of a vulture climbing the air toward him. He met it with the axe-blade and hacked it down. There was a cry of excitement from below as the body flapped down the stairs, its wings working like paddles. Harry sped up the remaining flight to where Valentin was standing, listening. It wasn't the chatter he was attending to, or the cries of the lawyer. It was the jackhammer. "They brought the rapparee," he said. "I wounded Butterfield." "I heard. But that won't stop them. We can still try the door." "I think we're too late, my friend." "No!" said Harry, pushing past Valentin. The demon had given up trying to drag Swan's body to the door, and had laid the magician out in the middle of the corridor, his hands crossed on his chest. In some last mysterious act of reverence, he had set folded paper bowls at Swan's head and feet, and laid a tiny origami flower at his lips. Harry lingered only long enough to reacquaint himself with the sweetness of Swan's expression, and then ran to the door and proceeded to hack at the chains. It would be a long job. The assault did more damage to the axe than to the steel links. He didn't dare give up, however. This was their only escape route now, other than flinging themselves to their deaths from one of the windows. That he would do, he decided, if the worst came to the worst. Jump and die, rather than be their plaything. His arms soon became numb with the repeated blows. It was a lost cause. The chain was unimpaired. His despair was further fueled by a cry from Valentin, a high, weeping call that he could not leave unanswered. He left the fire door and returned past the body of Swan to the head of the stairs. The demons had Valentin. They swarmed on him like wasps on a sugar stick, tearing him apart. For the briefest of moments he struggled free of their rage, and Harry saw the mask of humanity in rags, and the truth glistening bloodily beneath. He was as vile as those besetting him, but Harry went to his aid anyway, as much to wound the demons as to save their prey. The wielded axe did damage this way and that, sending Valentin's tormentors reeling back down the stairs, limbs lopped, faces opened. They did not all bleed. One sliced belly spilled eggs in thousands. One wounded head gave birth to tiny eels, which fled to the ceiling and hung there by their lips. In the melee, he lost sight of Valentine, forgot about him, indeed, until he heard the jackhammer again, and remembered the broken look on Valentine's face when he'd named the thing. He'd called it the rapparee, or something like that. And now, as his memory shaped the word, it came into sight. It shared no trait with its fellows. It had neither wings nor mane nor vanity. It seemed scarcely even to be flesh, but forged, an engine that needed only malice to keep its wheels turning. At its appearance the rest retreated, leaving Harry at the top of the stairs in a litter of spawn. Its progress was slow, its half-dozen limbs moving in oiled and elaborate configurations to pierce the walls of the staircase and so haul itself up. It brought to mind a man on crutches, throwing the sticks ahead of him and levering his weight after. But there was nothing invalid in the thunder of its body, no pain in the white eye that burned in its sickle head. Harry thought he had known despair, but he had not. Only now did he taste its ash in his throat. There was only the window left for him, that and the welcoming ground. He backed away from the top of the stairs, forsaking the axe. Valentine was in the corridor. He was not dead, as Harry had presumed, but kneeling beside the corpse of Swan, his own body drooling from 100 wounds. Now he bent close to the magician, offering his apologies to his dead master, no doubt. But no, there was more to it than that. He had the cigarette lighter in his hand and was lighting a taper. Then, murmuring some prayer to himself as he went, he lowered the taper to the mouth of the magician. The origami flower caught and flared up. Its flame was oddly bright and spread with supernatural efficiency across Swan's face and down his body. Valentine hauled himself to his feet, the firelight burnishing his scales. He found enough strength to incline his head to the body as its cremation began, and then his wounds overcame him. He fell backward and lay still. Harry watched as the flames mounted. Clearly, the body had been sprinkled with gasoline or something similar, for the fire raged up in moments, gold and green. Suddenly, something took hold of his leg. He looked down to see that a demon, with flesh like ripe raspberries, still had an appetite for him. Its tongue was coiled around Harry's shin, its claws reached for his groin. The assault made him forget the cremation or the rapparee. He bent to tear at the tongue with his bare hands, but its slickness confounded his attempts. He staggered back as the demon climbed his body, its limbs embracing him. The struggle took them to the ground, and they rolled away from the stairs along the other arm of the corridor. The struggle was far from uneven. Harry's repugnance was at least the match of the demon's ardour. His torso pressed to the ground, he suddenly remembered the rapparee. Its advance reverberated in every board and wall. Now it came into sight at the top of the stairs and turned its slow head towards Swan's funeral pyre. Even from this distance Harry could see that Valentine's last-ditch attempts to destroy his master's body had failed. The fire had scarcely begun to devour the magician. They would have him still. Eyes on the rapparee, Harry neglected his more intimate enemy, and it thrust a piece of flesh into his mouth. His throat filled up with pungent fluid. He felt himself choking. Opening his mouth, he bit down hard upon the organ, severing it. The demon did not cry out, but released sprays of scalding excrement from pores along its back, and disengaged itself. Harry spat its muscle out as the demon crawled away. Then he looked back toward the fire. All other concerns were forgotten in the face of what he saw. Swan had stood up. He was burning from head to foot, his hair, his clothes, his skin. There was no part of him that was not alight. But he was standing, nevertheless, and raising his hands to his audience in welcome. The rapparee had ceased its advance. It stood a yard or two from Swan, its limbs absolutely still, as if it were mesmerized by this astonishing trick. Harry saw another figure emerge from the head of the stairs. It was Butterfield. His stump was roughly tied off. A demon supported his lopsided body. "Put out the fire," demanded the lawyer of the rapparee. "It's not so difficult." The creature did not move. "Go on," said Butterfield. "It's just a trick of his. He's dead, damn you. It's just conjuring." "No," said Harry. Butterfield looked his way. The lawyer had always been insipid. Now he was so pale his existence was surely in question. "What do you know?" he said. "It's not conjuring," said Harry. "It's magic." Swan seemed to hear the word. His eyelids fluttered open, and he slowly reached into his jacket and with a flourish produced a handkerchief. It too was on fire. It too was unconsumed. As he shook it out, tiny bright birds leaped from its folds on humming wings. The Rapparee was entranced by this sleight of hand. Its gaze followed the illusory birds as they rose and were dispersed, and in that moment the magician stepped forward and embraced the engine. It caught Swan's fire immediately, the flames spreading over its flailing limbs. Though it fought to work itself free of the magician's hold, Swan was not to be denied. He clasped it closer than a long-lost brother, and would not leave it be until the creature began to wither in the heat. Once the decay began, it seemed the Rapparee was devoured in seconds, but it was difficult to be certain. The moment, as in the best performances, was held suspended. Did it last a minute, 2 minutes, 5? Harry would never know, nor did he care to analyze. Disbelief was for cowards, and doubt a fashion that crippled the spine. He was content to watch, not knowing if Swan lived or died, if birds, fire, corridor, or if he himself, Harry Damour, were real or illusory. Finally, the Rapparee was gone. Harry got to his feet. Swan was also standing, but his farewell performance was clearly over. The defeat of the Rapparee had bested the courage of the horde. They had fled, leaving Butterfield alone at the top of the stairs. "This won't be forgotten or forgiven," he said to Harry. "There's no rest for you. Ever. I am your enemy." "I hope so," said Harry. He looked back towards Swan, leaving Butterfield to his retreat. The magician had laid himself down again. His eyes were closed, his hands replaced on his chest. It was as if he had never moved, but now the fire was showing its true teeth. Swan's flesh began to bubble, his clothes to peel off in smuts and smoke. It took a long while to do the job, but eventually the fire reduced the man to ash. By that time it was after dawn, but today was Sunday, and Harry knew there would be no visitors to interrupt his labours. He would have time to gather up the remains, to pound the bone shards and put them with the ashes in a duffel bag. Then he would go out and find himself a bridge or a dock and put Swan into the river. There was precious little of the magician left once the fire had done its work, and nothing that vaguely resembled a man. Things came and went away. That was a kind of magic. And in between, pursuits and conjurings, horrors, guises. The occasional joy. That there was room for joy. Ah, that was magic too.